Hello, and welcome back to H-Rate Book Reviews. This is the second time now I'm recording this video in its entirety because my microphone here wasn't working. Apparently I had unplugged it at some point and forgot to plug it back in, and so the audio was recording, it was just recording through the camera, which is very bad quality, so I am redoing this entire thing right now. Anyway, I'm going to review a college textbook. I'm serious. This book here is a textbook I got for, naturally, a positive psychology college course last year. Yeah, it's a paperback textbook. What a time to be alive. Now, naturally, most people would return or resell their textbooks to recuperate some of the financial losses from these abhorrently priced things. I was fortunate that this book was paid for on behalf of the school. And normally the same process would apply to them, but this book was something special to me. I specifically requested to keep it, and that was granted. But what was so special about this book? Well, it's because it's about positive psychology. And you know from the title of the book that is the science of happiness and flourishing. But that doesn't tell you all that much at the end of the day. Essentially, it is about the science of how and why people are happy, motivated, satisfied, successful, optimistic, and more. And it is also about the science of how to increase those traits and why you should. Now, if you've seen my video over on 828 Politics about my moral system, link in the description of course, you would know that this sort of thing is incredibly important to me. And I think it should be important to everyone. We should all work to understand the science of living a good life. And this book is great at that. Now, this thing is 503 total pages, with a whopping 106 of those pages being exclusively references to all the studies it cites. But for the remaining pages, well, there's a lot to them. This is one of the densest books I've read, and yeah, I read the whole thing. Let me tell you some of the things I learned. Firstly, negative and positive emotions are, by and large, independent of one another. In most situations, you can absolutely feel both negative and positive things at the same time, because the existence of one does not exclude the existence of another. Contrary to popular convention, it is not a balancing act between the two sides. Secondly, at the end of the day, almost everything influences how we feel. The environment around us, our culture, our thinking, and even our behavior are all important factors in our emotions. The hedonic treadmill is also something we need to consider. Essentially, when it comes to emotions, our brain is very good at adapting to them. In fact, far better than we realize. Difficulties that make it feel as though it will take months to feel good again can oft be mostly neutral in just one. Feelings of great euphoria and fun that make us feel like you'll fly for weeks fade in a few days. In short, we always return, and quickly, to a sort of baseline emotional state. So, generally, if you want to increase your subjective well-being in the long term, raw emotion isn't the way to go about it. Rather, it involves much more complex phenomena, such as satisfaction, wisdom, and more. Flow is a real thing in positive psychology. It is defined as follows. If I can get to the page, I have a bookmark for it, and yet, there we go. Flow denotes the holistic sensation present when we act with total involvement. It is the state in which action follows upon action according to an internal logic which seems to need no conscious intervention on our part. We experience it as a unified flowing from one moment to the next, in which we feel in control of our actions, and in which there is little distinction between self and environment, between stimulus and response, or between past, present, and future. Yes, there is actual research on this experience and how to induce it, as well as the benefits from it. Now, the feeling of love, both of loving and being loved, is also very important to us. Many of us have heard of something called oxytocin, I'm sure, or oxytocin, whatever. And generally, it is released when we engage in pro-social behaviors. But it is more powerfully released during moments of deep intimacy, and has a myriad of different benefits like stress reduction. And it's not the only hormone released with those properties either. Now, of course, no look at well-being would be complete without looking at physical health as well. And interestingly, there are many factors that also play into that you wouldn't really expect, like humor and optimism. Generally, the more optimistic people are, the healthier both their minds and bodies are. And people with stronger senses of humor also have a whole host of benefits. One that's particularly interesting to me is that, and I quote, dispositional humor was associated with reduced stress and fewer physical symptoms among patients with fibromyalgia syndrome. Also fascinating to note is that even just the anticipation of laughter is enough to lower stress. We can just think about laughing and we get benefits from it. Another thing we get benefits from is actually art and beauty. There is something about the human mind that is attuned to the aesthetic and beauty in this world, and experiencing it more often allows for better health and also helps us in other skills mentioned like optimism. Now, something people can do to help themselves make sense of some part of their lives, or even of life as a whole, is to create a narrative, to tell a story about it. Obviously, the actual building blocks of it are the reality we experience, with all the bits and pieces being factual events and thoughts and the like. But what's important is the creative construction of it that allows us to direct our lives in the way we need. Wisdom is something deeply complex. It is more than just knowledge or intelligence, but something greater and far more enigmatic and nebulous. Yet in this book, surrounded by tell of just how powerful and important that trait is, I found the best definition of it yet, something I've stuck to ever since. Wisdom is the knowledge of the human condition. Now, some sort of spiritualism is also good for subjective well-being. This can be a codified religion, or it can be a general sense of a spiritual life that we live as well. Either way, such a thing is generally beneficial for our mentality and health. Something too many people do is look at their weaknesses and try to fix them, to round them out. And while that's not necessarily bad, it isn't generally the best approach, and can have some downsides. See, when people do that, they are being trained to find weaknesses, shortcomings, failings. When employees are asked to find a weakness in a business, then that is all they will find. But when people are asked to find their strengths, that's what they find as well. And furthermore, cultivating your strengths beyond what they are now is incredibly impactful to people and greatly beneficial, usually far more than improving on your weaknesses. And finally, this research is a long way off from being complete or absolute. There is still so much to learn about human well-being, and positive psychology will continue to expand and grow and, ironically, flourish as time goes on. And there was a piece of information from each chapter, just one tidbit. And the chapters are named here for anyone who is interested. Chapter 1, An Introduction to Positive Psychology. Chapter 2, Foundations, Emotion, Motivation, and the Nature of Well-Being. Chapter 3, Subjective Well-Being. Chapter 4, Leisure, Flow, Mindfulness, and Peak Performance. Chapter 5, Romantic Love and Positive Families. Chapter 6, Positive Health. Chapter 7, Excellence, Aesthetics, Creativity, and Genius. Chapter 8, Well-Being Across the Lifespan. Chapter 9, Models of Optimal Well-Being. Chapter 10, Religion, Spirituality, and Well-Being. Chapter 11, Positive Institutions and Cultural Well-Being. And finally, Chapter 12, A Look Toward the Future of Positive Psychology. I think it's very clear that this book is a huge wealth of very important information regarding humanity as a whole. No self-help books can compare to the literal science of happiness. If you struggle with things such as low self-esteem, lack of motivation, a sense of being lost, or anything else of the sort, give this book a read. Or don't, and instead just look up positive psychology and explore the vast amounts of information available for free. And if you're interested in psychology at all, or how to live a better life, or why some things are so important, or whatever, look into this. As I've said, this book here is a textbook. It is dense and swarming with information, and it is not fancily written or with particularly impactful prose. But importantly, it is not drab either, like most textbooks. It is written a lot like what I do in research settings, simply displaying a lot of information at once without being robotic about the process. Overall, I have to give the book a 9 out of 10, and I strongly recommend researching the field of positive psychology to everyone. So for now, live a good life. This has been A Trait Politics. Keep on reading.